to the numbers game. I'm Cynthia Frelund, and it is week 14, where there are only 13 total games, which means we have 12 more to break down through the lens of contextualized data, along with a few fun extra facts and stats to know. Week 14 is when my NFL bosses decide they really want to start adding my playoff odds and scenarios to our shows. I will post the very cool video they create with my data on my socials, but one thing I noticed, and you probably did too, is that we basically already know who's going to the postseason in the AFC. We don't know the order yet, and we don't know the wild cards necessarily or who wins, but 7 teams make the postseason in more than 75% of simulations. Then the odds to fall off a cliff. It is 30% for the Colts. Kansas City and Buffalo, they're already in. The Texans project to win the South and the Ravens to take the North, with Pittsburgh, LA, and Denver rounding out the wild card slots. The NFC has 10 teams with at least a 45% chance. There are a lot of question marks in the West, a 2-horse race for the solo slot in the South, and it is most likely that 3 teams from the North will be playing in the postseason. Seeding is absolutely all over the place in the NFC, though. Most importantly, thank you so much for choosing to spend some of your time and energy with me. It really does mean a ton to me. Last week, my model went 14 wins and 2 losses straight up, 9 and 7 ATS, and 7 and 9 on totals. That brings my season through 13 weeks to 68.7 straight up, 51.5% ATS, and 52.6 on totals. Let's start with 2 NFC teams where a win goes a long way in determining postseason positioning. The Falcons, who are jockeying with the Bucs to win the South, head to Minnesota to meet the 10-2 Vikings, who have their sights set on winning the North. Sam Darnold and company are 5-point favorites, and the total is 45.5 points. Atlanta is coming off their best defensive pressure game of the season, despite the loss, sacking Justin Herbert 5 times, which brings their sack total to 15 for the season. Yes, 1/3 of their season-long sacks happened last week, and 15 sacks, that still ranks 32nd, which is last, but it's an improvement for sure. After a great outing last week, again, Bijan Robinson now has 100 or more scrimmage yards in 6 of his last 7 games, and he's had 3 games this season with at least 100 rushing. The Vikings defense has allowed the fewest rushing yards per game and rushing touchdowns on the season, with 81.3 and 5 respectively, and they've only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns in their 5-game win streak since week 9. So a strength-on-strength situation here, even though the Vikings defense just allowed a season-high 154 rushing yards last week in Arizona. The more problematic note about the offense is the turnover situation. Kirk Cousins has 0 passing touchdowns with 6 interceptions over the Falcons' 3-game losing streak after throwing 7 touchdowns and 0 picks in wins during weeks 8 and 9. Cousins has the most giveaways in the league at 15. But do you know who ranks tied for number 2 in giveaways? Sam Darnold with 14. He's also been sacked the 5th most times in the league at 36. Darnold and the Vikings are coming off a narrow victory over the Cardinals, in part due to his 2 passing touchdowns and 130.3 passer rating under pressure last week. Bottom line, I have the Vikings by a touchdown, 26-19. Minnesota winning ranks 5th highest in confidence on the week because they have an advantage on both sides of the ball. On offense, Sam Darnold uses play action at the 9th highest rate and has the 2nd highest yard per play action pass average at 11.7. Atlanta has allowed the 10th highest passer rating on play action at about 107. On defense, it is the blitz. Brian Flores has dialed it up at the 2nd highest rate, and Kirk Cousins has a sub-90 passer rating against it, which ranks 25th. Minnesota clinches a playoff berth this week if they win, the Cardinals lose, and the Rams lose. My math has them doing their part in winning by 7 points, which would mark their 8th one-possession win of the season, which is the 2nd most in the NFL, trailing only the Chiefs. Only one team in the NFC has been mathematically eliminated from the postseason, and that is the New York Giants. They host the Saints, who come to town as 5-point favorites in a game where the total is 40.5 points. The Giants lost our pal Dex to a season-ending elbow injury last week. He's New York's sack leader with 9, despite being the only player in the NFL to be double-teamed on more than 60% of his pass rush snaps in a single season since we first started tracking in 2018. The Giants' pressure rate is significantly different with him off versus on, about 26% when he's not on the field versus about 36% when he's on the field. One piece of good news here, Malik Neighbors' 75 receptions are the most in a player's first 10 games all time. He passed OBJ, who had 71 in 2014. Neighbors is the only player in NFL history with 5 or more receptions and 50 or more receiving yards in 9 of his first 10 career games. Derek Carr is, somewhat quietly, having a great season, trending at a career-high 103.3 passer rating, that is 6th best in the NFL. He's taking only 0.8 sacks per game, that's the fewest in the league, and he's averaging 0.4 giveaways per game, which is the second fewest. Carr's advantage over the G-men is maybe most pronounced in the deep passing game, where he's had the 6th highest attempt rate and is tied for the second most touchdowns at 6. New York has allowed a 69.2 completion percentage on such passes. That is the highest in Next Gen Stats history. By the way, no team has ever finished a season allowing more than a 60% deep passing completion rate. Bottom line, even with Drew Lock as a starter, I still have a closer than expected, 4-point win for the Saints, 23-19. That is more total points than the number as well. This ranks 9 of 13 in confidence. The Giants currently hold the number 1 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, and should my winner hold, they would be 1 game closer to choosing first overall for the first time since 1965. That is before the Common Draft era. There are 3 AFC teams eliminated from the postseason already: the Raiders, Patriots, and the Jags, who travel to Tennessee for a date with the Titans, where the home team is favored by 3.5 and the total is 39.5 points. Trevor Lawrence officially went on IR, which means Mac Jones will go this week. But it's Brian Thomas Jr. who I want to highlight here. Not only does the rookie lead the team with 46 receptions, 765 yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns, he's actually one of just 5 players to have at least 750 receiving yards and at least 6 receiving touchdowns this season. Ready for the company he's keeping? Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, and Terry McLaurin. Will Levis has now been sacked 22 times over the last 4 games alone. This is the most in a 4-game span since Warren Moon in 1985. Levis also has some dramatic pressure splits, which isn't shocking at all given that sack stat. His passer rating under pressure, 54.3, with 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions, versus a 102.5 with 11 touchdowns and 5 picks when not under pressure. Bottom line, I have Tennessee by a field goal, 22-19. This ranks 8th in confidence, but the win for the Titans is driven by a specific matchup advantage for Will Levis. It's against split safety coverages, so cover 2 or cover 4, for example. Levis has the 6th best completion percentage at nearly 73 and 5 passing touchdowns, which is tied for the most, along with 9 yards per pass, which is the 3rd most against these looks, since returning from injury in Week 10. The Jags use this coverage at the 4th highest rate and allow the 3rd most yards per pass to it. For our first list, I went extra nerdy, aka I had insomnia. I adapted a tech idea that I've been kicking around to fit this show. So very broadly, you know how ChatGPT and other AI constructs answer a question you've input. So I ask it a question, it mines a whole bunch of data that's been trained on and gives me an answer. Well, I want to reverse that paradigm. So I want to use AI to generate the questions that occur at a frequency that says this is worth answering. That's a whole other can of worms, but I want the tech to ask the questions and the human to answer the questions. So I tried it out using the 3 games that we've already gone through to find prop bets that could be cool. Interestingly enough, it kind of came up with a if this or that and kind of a this or that. It's very interesting. Let me know what you think here. And if we like it, also let me know a splashy name. AI question 1. Which is more likely, Drake London to catch at least 5 passes or Justin Jefferson to catch at least 6? Okay, let's break this down for my answer. Drake London, he had 16 targets last week against the Chargers. He caught 9 for 86. I have him slated for 6 receptions in this one, or really 6.3 if you'll allow me the decimal. I have Jefferson with 7 receptions, though he's only met or exceeded this number in 4 games this season. He did have 7 last week, though. In decimal form, it's 6.8. So the edge goes to London because it is a little bit different spread. So 5 to 6.3 versus 6 to 6.8. AI question 2, which is more likely, Wan'Dale Robinson to have more than 30.5 receiving yards or Marquez Valdez-Scantling to have more than 38.5? My answer, I actually have Wandale with more yards than MVS total, so in terms of likelihood, it is Robinson since his number is lower. However, both exceed those thresholds for me this week, meaning two overs. I already talked about the Giants' deep passing issues, and MVS does have 4 touchdowns in the past 3 games. However, even though the Giants' passers combined have averaged the fewest yards per attempt at just 5.9, Robinson has managed to exceed 31 yards in 5 of his last 6 games, and game script would likely dictate that the G-men will be playing from behind. Okay, back to our normal game breakdowns, not the internet asking us questions. Let's head down to Tampa, where the already eliminated Raiders take on the Bucs, who are trying to take the South away from Atlanta. Buccaneers are touchdown favorites, and the total is 46 points. Last week against the Chiefs, K'Lavon Chaisson generated 8 pressures at a 42.1 pressure rate, the highest pressure generated in a game this season. He also ranks top 15 in both quick pressure rate at 6% and average time to pressure at 2.67 seconds. Aiden O'Connell was a perfect 6 for 6 for 138 yards, along with a touchdown and perfect passer rating under pressure against Kansas City. This will be a key again this week as the Bucs defense has the 4th most quarterback pressures this season. I am basing my model on Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, and Bucky Irving all playing, which seems to be the way things are trending, but it's worth noting because one of the biggest strengths of the Bucs offense is Bucky Irving on inside rushes. This is an area he's run through at a 5 percentage points higher than league average. On them, he has the 5th highest per carry average at 4.8 yards and the 6th most yards after missed tackles forced. The Raiders' defense has been the 4th most generous to such runs in terms of rushing yards over expected. Bottom line, I have a convincing Bucs win 28-19. Tampa winning ranks number 2 of 13 in terms of confidence, and my reverse ChatGPT model in this one came up with a question about who is more likely to score between Brock Bowers and Cade Otton. And the answer is that both are over 46%, with Bowers, who has a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games, at 49%. Staying in Florida, let's move on to an AFC East matchup between the Jets and Dolphins in Miami. Fins are 6-point favorites, and the total is 45.5. A fun note here is a Devontae Adams versus Jalen Ramsey matchup tracker. Adams has 9 receptions for 117 yards on 14 targets in Ramsey's coverage. He has an 8.4 yard per target average, which is the 8th highest against any player. Okay, that is a tiny sample size, but it is very fun. FYI, in his career, Ramsey has allowed just 1/4 of the passes traveling in his coverage to be caught when playing man defense. Tua Tagovailoa leads the NFL in completion percentage at 74.5, which would be a single-season record, in large part because of the foundation he lays with quick passes. He's attempted the most such passes this season, has the 2nd most EPA per pass, and 3rd most yards per pass on them. And the Jets are one of 3 teams to not have a pick on a quick pass. And they've allowed the 10th most EPA per pass when quarterbacks have thrown in under 2.5 seconds. Bottom line, I modeled this one with Breece Hall playing, even though he did not practice as of Wednesday. Hall is one of just 2 players with at least 600 rushing and 400 receiving yards this season, and would be a big help should he be good to go. But even with him playing, I still have a touchdown win for the Dolphins, 25-18. The Jets' O-line has not helped their rushers out, allowing the 2nd fewest yards before contact per carry. This is the Dolphins' strength, as their defense has allowed the fewest such yards at 0.5 per carry. The biggest point disparity of the week is in Philly. The Eagles are 12.5-point favorites over the Panthers, and the total is 46 points in this one. By the way, 4 of Philadelphia's remaining 5 games are all at home. Since becoming the starter again in Week 8, Bryce Young has performed much better under pressure. He has a positive completion percentage over expected. It's nearly 4%. He's generated positive EPA on over 40% of dropbacks when under pressure. And by the way, in weeks 1 and 2, this CPOE was negative 12, and he was sacked on 29% of dropbacks. Another positive change has been DJ Wanham, who debuted in week 10 and has 13 pressures since then, the most among Panthers defenders over that span. He has a 14.6 pressure rate, also leading the team. However, this week he does draw a tough matchup with Jordan Mailata. He's allowed the 9th lowest pressure rate among left tackles this season. Next week, I promise to try not to talk about Saquon Barkley, but when he's doing such amazing things, like the numbers are incredible. Anyways, this week the matchup is so good, we're doing it. Let's just look at the second half and overtime of games this season. He has 982 rushing yards, 1,125 scrimmage yards, which are the most by any player in their first 12 games of a season since at least 1991. Carolina, they've allowed the most rushing and overtime yards at 86.8. And let's go with the next gen stats. He's averaging the most rushing yards over expected, 1.9 per carry. He also has the 8th highest explosive run rate, and the 5th highest yard after contact per carry average is 3.7. Over the past 2 weeks, Carolina has allowed the 11th most RYOE per carry, the 6th highest explosive run rate, and the 4th most yards after contact per carry. One more note. Barkley and Jalen Hurts are both in the top 5 in rushing first downs, and the Panthers have allowed the most with 113. Bottom line, I have the Eagles by 12, 28-16. Philly winning ranks number 1 in confidence, and I have the Birds getting into the end zone at least 2 times on the ground, which will mark a significant benchmark for their quarterback. That brings us to prop list number 2, our top-end touchdown scorers. 5 big names who forecast for big games and a trip or so to the end zone. I just alluded to it, but Jalen Hurts' potential to score a rushing touchdown is very high in this one. He already is the first quarterback in NFL history to have 3 seasons with 12 or more rushing touchdowns in their career, but one more trip to the end zone on the ground means passing both Josh Allen and Cam Newton for the most rushing touchdowns by a quarterback in their first 6 seasons, and that's in NFL history. My number 2, Saquon Barkley. I just want to make it abundantly clear. I think he ends up in the end zone in this matchup. Number 3, Alvin Kamara for the first time in 6 games against the Giants. We're going back to the fun fact well here. If he has one more receiving touchdown, he'd be the 4th player in NFL history with 50-plus rushing and 25-plus receiving. He's at 60 and 24 right now. Number 4, Devon Achane, who's averaging 6.1 yards per touch since the beginning of last season. That's the 3rd most since 1970 for a player in their first 2 seasons. And of course, he leads the Dolphins in touchdowns with 9. And number 5, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I know it's not till Monday, but the fact that both of them are over 50% against Dallas is notable enough to be included here. Oh, and also throw in CeeDee Lamb in there because in that matchup, there are going to be a ton of points. The Steelers basically ended Jamar Chase and the Bengals' chance at a postseason berth last week in Cincinnati, and this week they play host to the Browns. Pittsburgh is a touchdown favorite, and the total is 44 points. One of the keys to the Browns' Week 11 snowy underdog win on TNF was how well they neutralized TJ Watt and how impactful Myles Garrett was. Garrett had 3 sacks, 8 pressures, and a forced fumble, while Watt had 0 sacks, 0 hits, 1 TFL, and 4 total tackles. Browns tackle Jack Conklin held Watt to just 1 total pressure as well. For context, Watt leads the NFL with 5 forced fumbles and 16 TFLs. Garrett also had 8 pressures again last week against the Broncos, marking his 3rd such game this season. Deep passing, that is the advantage again for the Steelers in this one. Russell Wilson now has 15 deep completions and a next-gen era leading plus 15 CPOE on them. George Pickens leads the NFL with 474 yards on deep passes and a plus 21 catch rate over expected. That is the 2nd highest. And Cleveland, they have allowed the 2nd most yards at 785 and the 9th highest CPOE on deep passes. Bottom line, I have a 5-point win for the Steelers in a game with bigger than you might imagine playoff implications in terms of seeding, because the next opponents for the Steelers are the Eagles, then Ravens, then Chiefs, then Bengals. My score is 25-20, and the Steelers winning ranks 6th of 13 in confidence. Across the country in Santa Clara and in the afternoon window, the Bears take on the Niners in a game where the very banged-up home team is a 4-point favorite over the visitors, who now have an interim head coach, and the total in the game is 44 points. Chicago has the 4th highest explosive run rate against light boxes this season at 18%, and the Niners have allowed the 4th most yards after contact per carry when using a light box. DJ Moore has run 24% of his routes behind the line of scrimmage, which is the highest rate of his career, where he's earned the 2nd most receiving yards over expected, and he's also tied for the most yak on these receptions since Week 11. The Niners have allowed the 11th most such yards at 5.9 per reception. Brock Purdy has a 134.1 passer rating when targeting George Kittle this season, along with 7 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions. That's the 4th highest by any quarterback-receiver duo. Kittle also has the most receiving yards over expected and receptions over expected in the red zone among tight ends this season. Bottom line, this is game 13 of 13 in confidence. However, I have the Bears upsetting the Niners 23-22, in large part because we saw the Niners increase their blitz rate last week to try to overcome some of their production loss due to injuries like Nick Bosa, and we've seen Caleb Williams improve against the blitz since Thomas Brown took over in week 11. Williams has a 118.2 passer rating and averages 9.6 yards per pass against the blitz since week 11, which is when he took over, along with 328 yards. That ranks second most. Just so you have the full picture, before Thomas Brown, it was 79.3 in terms of passer rating and 5.7 yards per pass against the blitz. The Bills have already won the East and trolled me, along with others who didn't have that on their bingo card ahead of the season, which is hilarious and well-deserved, but they have to keep their foot on the gas if they want the 1 seed and solo playoff bye. The Rams are fully still in the playoff picture, and this game would go a long way to help them out. Buffalo comes out here to SoFi as 4.5-point favorites, and the total is 49. One advantage in favor of the Bills is on inside rushes. Buffalo running backs have been contacted behind the line of scrimmage at the second lowest rate this season, and they average the 6th most yards before contact per carry. The Rams defense is 5th worst in contacting backs behind the line of scrimmage and have the 2nd lowest run stuff rate. On defense, the Bills have used a 4-man rush at the 4th highest rate, and Matthew Stafford's passer rating when defenses don't send extra men is 20th. He also has the 4th worst passer rating under pressure. However, some good news for Stafford and the Rams is that Buffalo only has the 19th highest pressure rate. They also play zone the 4th most often, and since week 8, Cooper Kupp ranks 5th and Puka Nacua ranks 9th among wide receivers in passer rating when targeted in zone coverage. Next Gen Stats shows one interesting strength-on-strength matchup in this game that could prove to be really impactful, and that is early down rushing success. Buffalo ranks 10th best here, and LA is 3rd most successful. However, on defense, there is a disparity, as in the Bills' defense ranks 8th best at limiting the success of these early down runs, and the Rams ranks 6th worst on them. And by the way, the Bills just got Matt Milano back as well. Bottom line, despite the Rams having the best quarterback pressure rate in the NFL, they rank just 21st in sacks, meaning they aren't always getting home on those pressures. Josh Allen has been sacked just 13 times, the fewest by any quarterback to start every game. And between his style and elite O-line, he's only even faced pressure at the 14th lowest rate. Bills win 27-21, and Buffalo winning ranks 4th in confidence. This brings us to our weekly wild cards. You know the drill. These are not the biggest names at their position. They weren't early round fantasy football picks, but this week they have elevated end zone reaching odds based on their matchups. Number 1, DeAndre Swift. Swift and DJ Moore have the highest odds on the Bears of ending up in the end zone this week against the Niners. Number 2, Chase Brown. I usually try to keep these to games we've covered already, but we only have 13 games, and Brown gets into the end zone in a very high 85% of simulations on Monday night. Number 3, Rico Dowdle, another Monday night player. In fairness, this is my highest forecast scoring game of the week. You'll see, but basically don't forget about him in fantasy. Number 4, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. He has 8 receiving touchdowns on just 20 receptions. He only has 365 yards, but his 40% of receptions resulting in a receiving touchdown is tied for the highest in the Super Bowl era. Mostly he's also facing a Jags team that's really vulnerable to passing touchdowns. You could also look at a big game for Calvin Ridley in a revenge situation if you enjoy narratives that also align with math. And number 5, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Not just because he had one 2 weeks ago in his last matchup against Arizona, but more because of where he runs his routes and does his damage. It is still a problem for the Cardinals. Which brings us to the biggest game in the afternoon window from a playoff perspective, which is in Arizona, where the second go-round of Seahawks-Cardinals could end up being for all the marbles in the West. Cards are 2.5-point home favorites, and the total is 44.5 points. Geno Smith has used a short pass on just a hair over the league average of his pass attempts at 45%. He has the 6th most yards per attempt on them at 6.9, and Arizona has allowed the 4th highest success rate and 4th most EPA per short pass this season. In Week 12, JSN caught 6 of 7 for 77 yards and a touchdown on these short passes. Now, JSN also leads the NFL with 57 receptions and nearly 700 yards from the slot, and Arizona is allowing the 6th most EPA per target and sixth highest success rate to slot-aligned players. Arizona has a really special player in tight end Trey McBride, who's the first tight end in NFL history to have 2 consecutive games with 12 receptions. James Conner is also having himself a season, with the 4th most forced missed tackles at 74. However, one thing that's trending in the wrong direction, Kyler Murray's turnovers. He now has as many in 2 games after his bye as he did in the 10 games before their bye. Bottom line, this game is 12 of 13 in confidence, which means second lowest on the week. I have the Seahawks winning 23-21, in large part because the Cards' defense still isn't getting pressure. It ranks 24th, and Geno Smith has the 3rd best completion percentage when not under pressure. To round this out, it does go down to 18th when he is under pressure. The run game has not been consistent for the Hawks on early downs, which has led to them having the longest average distance to gain of 8.4 yards on 3rd down. That's in the entire league, and that helps explain the erosion stat under pressure. Styles make for fights, however, and this one favors the Hawks in an upset. In the AFC West, the already playoff-bound Chiefs host the very likely playoff-bound Chargers on Sunday Night Football. Patrick Mahomes and company are 4-point favorites, and the total is 43 points. The Chargers lead the NFL with 23 sacks and 43 hits since Week 8. Mahomes has been sacked 5 or more times in 2 straight weeks, and by the way, he'd only been sacked 5 or more times once in his career prior to that. The Chargers lead the NFL with 23 sacks and 43 hits since Week 8. Patrick Mahomes has been sacked 5 or more times in 2 straight weeks, and he'd only been sacked 5 or more times once in his career prior to that. LA's defense holds opponents to the worst completion percentage on 3rd down. It is under 49%, the 2nd lowest passer rating allowed, and have allowed just 1 touchdown on this crucial down. Mahomes does have the best 3rd down completion percentage in the league at 69.2. However, a big piece of Mahomes' magic is on scrambles. He has the 8th most rushing yards and 5th most RYOE on them this season, and the Chargers have allowed the 4th most rushing yards over expected, 6th most rushing yards per scramble, and 2nd most first downs off of scrambles this season. Bottom line, the on-off splits with J.K. Dobbins are interesting. 4.8 yards per carry with him on, 3.2 when he's off. Dobbins has a 15.2 explosive run rate. Edwards is averaging just 5.8. Also, Justin Herbert has 0 interceptions in 10 starts, which is the 2nd longest streak since 1970, but he also only has a 46.1 completion percentage against man coverage, which the Chiefs play at the 7th highest rate. Kansas City squeaks by again, 24-21, and this ranks 10th in confidence. Last but not least, the Monday Nighter in Dallas, where the Bengals come to Jerry's World as 5.5-point favorites. The total is 49.5 points. The Bengals defense has allowed the 2nd fewest yards on designed rushes between the tackles, just 3.8 per carry. They've hit opponents behind the line of scrimmage at the 3rd highest rate and allowed the 3rd fewest yards before contact on such carries. I know what I said about Rico Dowdle earlier, and I stand by it, but just look for him to run outside the tackles where the opportunity is greater. Joe Burrow leads the league with a 102.8 passer rating under pressure, and the Cowboys pressure at the 6th highest rate. Burrow is great on 3rd down, especially when teams blitz. In fact, he has the 3rd best success rate against 3rd down blitzes since entering the league in 2020. He'll need to lean on that in this one because Dallas's defense has a 50% pressure rate on 3rd down. They blitz on 3rd down at the 5th highest rate, and overall, they have the highest pressure rate when blitzing this season at 50%. Bottom line, Bengals win 28-23, and Cincinnati winning ranks 7th in confidence. So far this season, Dallas is 1-5 at home, where they've allowed an NFL worst 34.5 points per game. Look out for Micah Parsons, but don't forget about Trey Hendrickson. He leads the NFL with 11.5 sacks, and he's tied for the league with 25 quarterback hits. He also is 2nd in pressures with 63. It's time for our spicy and bland menu. Bland first. Remember, these are props that happen in at least 55% of my simulations. Number 1, Josh Allen to have more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. Did you know that Josh Allen is the only quarterback of the 26 who've thrown at least 25 deep passes to not have at least one of those passes result in a touchdown? This is the week. The Rams have allowed the most such touchdowns at 8, and they've allowed 15 yards per deep pass, which is the 5th most. Number 2, Joe Burrow to throw at least 2 touchdown passes against the Cowboys. Number 3, Pat Freiermuth to have more than 26.5 receiving yards. Do I think the Steelers score 44 again? No, but Freiermuth has been the pressure outlet, especially over the past 2 games, with 4 for 59 and 6 for 68 and a touchdown. On to the spicies. These happen in at least 48% of simulations with enough volatility to make the juice worth the squeeze. Remember, normal spice levels are 2 blands and 1 spicy, and my preferred recipe is 2 spicy and 1 bland. Number 1, Jameis Winston to throw an interception. Interceptions will always be spicy for me because they have randomness baked in. However, he's thrown past the sticks at the second highest rate and has 9 touchdowns with 5 interceptions. And the Steelers have 11 interceptions, the second most in the league on such passes. Number 2, Jonnu Smith to earn more than 49.5 receiving yards. He's gone well over this number in 6 of his past 8 games. Number 3, Tony Pollard to rush for more than 69.5 yards against the Jags. It's been a little feast or famine for him on the ground, but he projects in the 80s for me in this one to help keep Will Levis upright and away from pressure. There we have it. Week 14. Buy-mageddon in fantasy, and the last week with any buys at all. As always, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Projections, scores, and more, they are up. Remember, they up pretty much every day when the injury report and news comes out. A newsletter is coming. More special episodes are coming. Oh, and if you like my reverse AI situation stuff, let me know that too. Basically, just keep the conversation coming. And if you like the show, please like, subscribe, and pass it along so we can continue to grow.